Say it's time to get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Gibbons. I'm moderating our talk today. Welcome to 440 Gallery's Artist Talk. Thank you for being here. It's nice to see everybody, familiar faces and new faces.
Andra, hi.
And today we're talking about Amy Weil's show, Burnt Offerings, and the Project Space show, For the Love of Nature, with Joy Makon, Pedersen, and Robin Roi. So we get to talk to all of these artists. And the way it works is that we have questions that I'll ask the artists and they'll answer. But if questions are coming up for you, please put them in the chat. And when we're finished, I'll ask any questions in the chat. Or if you want to hold your question after we go through a PowerPoint where you'll get to see all the artwork, we can come back to this group format and you can unmute and ask. So I'll ask you to mute yourself during the talk. And when we're finished, then we'll take questions directly from people one at a time, of course. So the shows are up through August 10th. I encourage you, if at all possible, to see them in person because it's just amazing to see in person. And we have installation shots for you to get the feeling for it today if you can't make it in person. So happy that you chose this way to see the show. So without further ado, I think we can go to the PowerPoint.
And hold on, whoops. Uh-oh.
Here it comes.
Okay,
Thank you, Susan.
sure.
So we're starting with Burnt Offerings, and we'll take a look at the installation shots before I ask any questions. So Amy, if you want to say anything about the work while we're seeing it, feel free.
Okay, thank you.
I understand it's all encaustic, correct?
Yes, it's well, actually, it's paper that is immersed in encaustic beeswax, which makes it very transparent and gives it some durability so that I could hang them in these very long strings, because they do actually get pretty heavy, which is surprising. But the encaustic really keeps them strong. And as you can see with this one, they're very transparent and you can see the drawings from both sides. So each one has a front and a back. So if you look at it one way, you'll get one image, and then the other way, you'll get another image with the shadows creating more drawings, which I really like that effect. And I use wax thread as well, which I really love that thread. It's it's very tactile and really fun to thread into the materials. And this one, actually, these pieces were my first of this series, and just when the pandemic was starting. And this one's called Walking in a Line, or yeah, something. And it was having to do with, keeping 6 feet apart and everybody being distant. So that was my first piece with wax and paper and thread. That one's called Beach Day. And that's kind of like a large encaustic painting with some collage that is like a large version of the smaller pieces. It's like if you took one of those little ones and made it big. So I thought it fit in well with the show. And a lot of the, yes.
I wanted to say that I'm loving seeing the shadows that they cast.
Oh yeah, that's a lot of fun. The morning light creates really fun shadows, I have to say. And these are my paper wall pieces that I started to do after I did my vertical pieces, because I wanted to explore paper in different ways. And so these are more kind of whimsical animated figures. And I just played around with that idea. Also using thread and wax. And these are small little 6x6 encaustic pieces. Yeah. Those are sort of my signature encaustic. And as you can see with this one, they're very translucent. Such a warm light there.
Mm.
And I use a lot of thread in some of these, you know, where I actually sew into it. And I really enjoyed that process. I love the idea of just slowing down, like each piece, just taking time, because the whole thing took over a year to create. So it really was about slowing time down in a lot of ways, and you know, using these humble materials and creating an environment that is very tactile. And that's my painting behind it.
So I'm going to go back now so that
Yeah.
you
So
can have
Amy,
all of them.
this installation is really beautiful. It's mesmerizing. It's immersive. Maybe we can start by asking about the title. Why did you call the show Burnt Offerings?
Well, actually, I actually do burn the papers. I have over 600 of these little squares, about 700 in the show at this point. And so each one I wanted to burn the edges. It has to do with my feelings during the pandemic of you know, the trauma that we all experienced during lockdown, and you know, seeing people die, and it just was very, very traumatic for everybody. So I just started creating these pieces, and it dawned on me as I was working that it really was about kind of a tribute to people who were dying. So the 600 was a representation of the 600,000 people in just the America, in the United States. So it's kind of like burnt offerings is an offering of peace and healing. It was, you know, I wanted it to be an kind of almost uplifting feeling, like a forest, walking through a tranquil forest. So I didn't want it to be dark, but I wanted, you know, just like burnt offerings, when you offer something to the gods, it was a play on that. So this was an offering of peace and healing. So that's where that name came from.
It's really beautiful.
Thank you.
So I see connections between the works on the walls and the hanging pieces in terms of shapes, color, etc. And at the same time, the effect is very different. Hanging by thread is very different than being attached to the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to the similarities and differences in the two approaches?
I think with the hanging pieces, I started out we moved to a smaller studio. I think it was almost a practical thing that happened because my partner lost his job. So we had to downsize and move out of our larger space. We found a smaller one with these beautiful windows and a lot of height. So I was like, well, let's just see what happens with going vertical. So I started creating these small, there are 3x3, 4x4, and 5x5 squares. And so I just started sewing them, and the more I did it, the more I felt like creating these connections. Each one was like, you know, it's like they're separate squares, and yet all together it creates this unified, connected whole. And with the pieces on the wall, they're more individual. I mean, they connect with each other on the wall. There's a kind of relationship that happens with the figures on the wall, where I like to see them as, they're called walking, 1, 2, and 3. So they're very animated and whimsical and figurative for me. So
Excuse me, Susan, can you go to I see them as kind of hybrid pieces that are somewhere between the paintings and the hanging. Is this what you're talking about?
yeah. So these are, the one on the right has actual pigmented wax on it. And the one on the left has some collage, but they're sewn together. And these strings, to me, threads are like umbilical cords, you know, and they're like separated, but there is a relationship between the 3. And so, what was your question? I'm sorry.
Just the similarities and differences of the hanging pieces and the paintings.
Yeah, so these actually feel like some of my images that are actually in paintings. You know, I use a lot of shapes and compositional elements where things play in space together. So I was like, well, let's just take it outside of the paintings and put it on the wall. So, you know, this whole environment or installation is kind of like a floating grid, where my grids and my paintings, I just kind of took the grid into the space, and I took these pieces out of the painting into the space. So yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. So it's really amazing that each of the hanging squares is really 2 complete compositions. What is your inspiration for the imagery?
Well, when I started working with them, and I use this hot box. It's a polyrollin hot box, which is just fabulous, that I purchased about a year ago. And it's basically for creating monotypes, and a lot of people, encaustic painters, use it. And so when I put the paper, I put the encaustic medium, which is a beeswax and Demar crystal, and it's a fluid medium that you heat up, and then you put it on the hot box, and then when I put the paper on, that it soaks into the paper. So I was playing with that technique, and I would draw before I actually did it. So when I did the drawing, I noticed through the light coming in the window that it created another drawing from behind. So it was really just, I just thought it was really beautiful. So I started to make drawings where I would create a drawing, and then I would turn it around and see what it looked like from the other side. And I'd use the shadows from one side to complete the composition on the other side. So it was really wonderful to look at them in the light and just kind of like decide, well, which way should this go, you know? And every strand has its own kind of theme or voice in a way, because every time I did it, I would try to do at least 10 to 15 strands a day, or not 15 strands, but 10 to 15 squares that I would then sew into a strand.
So the strands are different lengths, and so they're available as strands if I wanted to hang one in my own window.
Yeah, you can definitely do that. I'm selling them as a strand, so they're between $500 and $1,800, depending on the size and the length. But you can buy the pieces individually. That I have some in my file, my flat file. In
the drawers in the gallery. So if you come into the gallery, whoever's gallery sitting can show you what's in the drawers. And
yeah, and I did just sell 2 strands, so I'm really happy.
That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So let's see. This show, it's an enormous body of work, really, and a really wonderful accomplishment.
Thank you.
Congratulations. And where has this led you? What's next for you?
Good question. You know, I really do love the light and shadow play in the gallery and also within the pieces. I definitely want to explore that more. I love painting as well, so I might try to go back into painting for a while on board and see how these compositions translate onto the canvas or hardboard again, and just see what happens with playing with more translucent. I tend to paint very thickly, you know, kind of a la Jasper Johns, you know, with his encaustic. A lot of encaustic painters paint very translucently, and it's so versatile. It's such a beautiful medium in that way. So I'm just going to play around with these ideas and see where it takes me.
Well, you have lots of ideas.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it was a lot of fun to create all of these, like over 700 tiny little compositions, and just find, they're a little bit like a floating journal, like a sketchbook in the air. It was like all these little impressionistic pieces, very spontaneous, intuitive drawings and collages and summer paintings. And it was really freeing for me to be able to just let loose and enjoy this process and not worry about it. It was like, gave me a lot of freedom. So that was really a lot of fun in that sense.
Really wonderful. And I look forward to seeing what happens next if these get developed into bigger paintings. That could be so interesting.
Or it could go into more sculptural. I have no idea.
Yeah, well, I look forward to seeing what happens.
Thanks,
Thank you
Karen.
so much, Amy. And let's move on to the project space. And if you have questions for Amy, go ahead and put them in the chat. So for the love of nature, we're going to start with Janet. So let's take a look at Janet's. Oh, first the whole installation. So this is what you'll see when you come to 440 Gallery. So yeah, now we're ready for Janet. It's really wonderful how different those three artists are, but how beautifully their work relates to one another. So Janet, one thing I love about your work is how the subject seems to guide the palette and even the application of the paint. What draws you to your subject matter?
Thank you. I decided to paint shells during this past winter, during lockdown, and try my hand at painting this botanical subject. I have collected shells just on our trips to the beach and out on Long Island, and I have this wonderful collection of shells. So I thought I'm going to, and at the same time, I was reading the 9th Street Women. So my husband and I went to go see Jane Frylicker's work. She's one of the abstract expressionists, but she paints more figurative, more still life. And I've been exploring the still life. So being very inspired from one of her oyster paintings, I set up and just enjoying the silhouette shape of a shell, the form, how it curls in on itself, and the light that it produces, simply because of its luminescent coloring, which looks pretty great against a darker background. So designing within that and kind of leaving the background a lot more gestural and a little abstract, I'm just celebrating this subject of this botanical shells.
So amazing. And so you mentioned the luminosity. So that's what really strikes me also, that the sense of luminosity here is almost abstract, and yet it also describes the objects really beautifully. Can you talk about your sense of light? And maybe we can look at the others as well.
Sure. I'm working in Flash. I've been working in Flash a lot lately and working on paper. And so a lot of the lightest tones that you're seeing is probably the paper that's showing through. But I'm building up in a way that I would with oil paint. You can do that with Flash paint. And it dries very, very quickly. You know, on some of them that have a really bright coloring, there's a problem, it's mostly Flash, but if I go in with a little bit of acrylic gouache to punch up an area, that's possible, although I don't see it in this one so much. But and working fairly gesturally, I like to you know, as someone who paints a little bit on the fast side, I am working to keep it kind of fresh, but with a design eye, I think, and pushing the light with some of these darker shadows. I think that helps pull the subject forward a little bit more.
Really beautiful. And yeah, everything you say is just so beautifully woven into the piece. So given this show's title, For the Love of Nature, I would ask you, what is your relationship to nature as subject matter?
Well, as a plein air, I do a lot of plein air painting outside. So the nature is the source, really, going back to the source to feel the light on your back, or to you know, try to work with a changing light or weather and design your painting on paper or canvas or whatever it is that you're working with. I did try to bring that back to the studio, and I'm thankful for my plein air experience. That's all I can say, because that really has informed my working in the studio, and pretty much, and thinking about how light and shadow and form work, but also just feeling the surf on my face as I paint in memory, mostly memory.
Well, I see that because
Go away.
even in the still life format, it has a freshness and a feeling like you could have stumbled on it in nature.
Well, thank you. That was part of the plan too, keeping it immediate and as if I were just picked it up and looked at it.
Yeah, so beautiful. Thank you, Janet.
Thanks, Karen.
So next, I think we're gonna look at Joy. So let's take a look at these two paintings. Wow, Joy, these two lovely pieces I know have specific titles. Can you say a bit more about the context for these paintings?
Sure. We're looking at magnolias, and I painted this at the very end of winter in the March, when it was still really cold and it was snowy, and I was inside, and it was just a chance that these looked like snow against the blue sky for me. And it was just, I could spend my time with it. I could take my time. I could add as much detail or not as I wanted to. And during the process, I received my vaccines. Life became a little sunnier and warmer. And I eventually did go out, and these are from the Central Park Conservancy Gardens, which I love to go to. And I was able to actually go and see this year's blossoms happening while I was painting these. So it really meant a lot to me to experience them, not only through my memory photographs, but in person. And the second painting of the Lilies and the Daisies is literally steps from my front door in July. And this summer I had some orthopedic surgery. So before and after is the title of this painting. And before was a lot harder to sit in my chair and paint, and after was a lot easier and much more pleasant. And so this did bridge that gap. And I left a lot of this painting unfinished by probably what I would do later, but I was done with it. I was happy. I think it looked fine, and I moved on from there.
I would hardly think this was unfinished. In fact, leads me to my next question. The draftsmanship and the exquisite handling of the material in these pieces is really impressive. What draws you to work in watercolor?
I've been using watercolor since I was a young child, and really it's become my medium. I like the low-techness of watercolor. It's really water and paint that you squeeze out of tubes. It has a small footprint for me, so it's really easy to set it up and put it away, because this one likes to jump into my palette all the time. And I also really love the effect of the water and the pigment on really beautiful paper. And I'm very much into how the effects happen on the paper. There's a certain magic that happens, and just from using it and experimenting and just pushing myself to try some things with this.
Thank you. The effect is really masterful. So I know that these are just two of many pieces of yours that take inspiration from nature. Can you speak about your relationship to nature as subject matter?
My paintings are basically done in the studio, but for me to go outside and with a camera, or not with a camera, but just to go outside and just experience what's around me through the light and the sun and the growth is really what it's all about for me. And it's very much a mood lifter. And especially this past year, when we've had issues with the pandemic, not being able to go out freely, I've had some mobility issues because of my physical stuff. So, I had to stick closer to home. I couldn't travel. For 2 years, I haven't traveled. I haven't gone to the gardens that I have always loved to go. So it's a different way of looking at things that are right around me. This was literally a few steps from my front door, and I'm just very fortunate to be able to see that and bring it back into the studio. It's important to me.
Thank you, Joy. Really beautiful. So let's now move on to Robin Roi, last but not least. And we'll take a look at her pieces first. And there they are all together. Robin, these lovely still lives have an interesting origin story. Can you please share that with our viewers?
Sure. These were done last winter, again, in the middle of the pandemic. And when going on to Zoom just seemed that was the way to be with people. It was almost the only way to be with people. And I really missed my friends, and a good friend of mine suggested that we take an oil painting class together on Zoom with Jessica Del Rimpe, who is a local oil painter in, I think her studio's in Gowanus. And at first I was very resistant because I've never painted with oils. It's not my medium. I don't really consider myself that kind of painterly painter. I do a lot of, my work is more graphic, more pattern oriented. I use collage, I use acrylic, lots of different mediums, but I've never painted with oils. So
then I thought, okay, well, what the heck, let's give myself a challenge here. And so we registered together, and that was kind of fun too, because we got to share our process of, struggling through, going through the class. And it was, I don't know, there were maybe like 6 or 7 people in the class. And it gave my life a bit of structure, which was really nice during that time when I was stuck at home. So I knew I had the class once a week, and then I had all week to, plan the still life and, and work on it. So yeah, it was great. It was also really great to get out of my comfort zone of what is my ordinary way of working. And it's always great to be a novice again. It's always a wonderful, jolt out of your system. So that's the story of the 4 paintings.
Beginner's mind. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. So I noticed the warmth of the palette here emphasizes the smooth solidity of the forms. Can you speak about your attraction to form in these pieces?
Yes, well, one of the other things that I have done a lot of is ceramic work. And all these forms were in my home, and they actually are pieces that were bisque fired and never glazed. They were never finished, but they are bisqued, and they were white clay and porcelain. So they had this beautiful white surface. And as a beginning oil painter, I thought it would be much easier to paint the shadows and highlights and the form if they were simple and not something that had a design on them or had a lot of colors. And it was really great to work on just these white forms, the bowls and this picture this picture shape that I had done. And as I went along, I got a little braver, and you can see that this one has that it's actually a piece of wood. It looks like a bone, but it's a piece of wood and a nut shell that are at the bottom and sitting on the table. So I was kind of slowly working my way towards objects that had more color to them. But form is a primary thing I'm interested in, particularly in ceramics. And it translated into the painting.
Susan, could we see the one with all 4?
Yes.
So seeing this series, Robin, with lovingly repeating the same or similar nature-inspired forms, I'm going to ask you as well, how does nature inspire or influence your work?
I think that I use nature a lot as a Kickstarter. Like when I'm in between projects, in between paintings or in between bodies of work, and that in between place where you don't know what you're going to do next, it's always a very disturbing time. And I always go to nature to kind of fill me up again and provide ideas and just to feed me. And so it may not even be the end result. It may not be the thing that I eventually end up painting, but it's the thing that kind of grounds me and inspires me and gets me going.
Thank you. Beautiful work in the project space. Thank you all. And now I see that we have a few questions in the chat. So the first one I see is Janet Pedersen talking about the ghosted or alternate side of the drawings. She's referring to Amy's. It's just brilliant. And Janet, if you want to unmute and say anything more about that.
Am I muted?
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. I just was listening to Amy talk about her process, and there's a sense of discovery in everything in the whole process that you're working with, Amy. I can't see you, but
Should I stop the share?
I think it would be nice to look at the images that she's talking about with the ghost on the other side.
but I guess if I had a question, was this a surprise to you, Amy? Was this something that you discovered along the way, or had you planned it out, or was this process something that each around the bend, it's like, oh, I'm going to do this now, and this works, and just your sense of discovery is what I'm thinking is brilliant, and I would hope that I would like to be able to do that with my work, that discovery along the way.
Well, I think you do, but thank you very much, Janet. It's really sweet. With this particular body of work, it really was kind of discovering as I went along. So it really kept me so engaged because, it was always like, well, let's try this, let's try that. It's like each one kind of, it just sort of a stepping stone to the next one. So when I discovered the translucency and creating these drawings on the other side, that was like, wow, I really want to do a million of these. So it was pretty much learn as I go.
Well,
I mean, I do know that Encaustic will create translucency, but I was really surprised with the paper. And I never work on paper with Encaustic because, Encaustic is fragile and it needs to be on a hard surface. But with paper, it actually works. There's something about the paper that's very skin-like to me and vulnerable. So it was a lot of, so that was also another element to it, why I wanted to work with paper.
and interesting that it's called a ghost image.
Yeah, I like that term.
Thanks, Amy. So the next question is from Harlan Mathieu. Amy, can you speak to how the individual pieces of the strands interrelate? You said, I thought, that they were assembled from the paintings of a single day.
Well, I would come into the studio knowing that I was going to try to work to create one long strand. So when I would do a square, a 3x3, or sometimes there were 4x4, that, I would say, what's the scale I'd like to work with today? And then I would just find materials and draw. And so one would lead to the next one. So I tried to create a mood to each one. Like there were some days where I was like really angry, listening to politics. So there's some angry strands. And then there are some that are happier, it just was the mood that I was feeling that day. And so each strand has a certain mood to it, I think.
Thank you, Amy. And Lynn Cole asks, is there an issue with heat for encaustic pieces? I'm not familiar with the technique.
Yes, there is. In fact, one of my pieces recently melted in a window, which was very sad, but a good learning experience because it was directly in the sun. I think it was because it was on a metal frame, which conducted heat. And then I had a bundle in the windowsill, which was starting to not be very good. But these are fine in the heat, as long as they're not strong heat is, intensely directed on it for hours, then they're fine.
But we're looking at the framed piece of the burnt pieces. So did the burning come from a technique with the encaustic in the
Oh,
first?
yeah. So I use the torch to draw with those pieces. A
And
lot
so
of
how do
my,
you use a torch in encaustic to begin with?
so I would take the paper. You can't torch it after it has the encaustic on it. You have to torch the paper before.
No, but in
Oh,
encaustic
sorry.
painting, are you using a torch already?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
so
a little
how does
slow.
that work?
So the paintings, when I work on a painting, encaustic actually means to fuse in, to burn into. So you always have to put a layer on and then fuse that layer with the next layer. Otherwise, the encaustic will peel off. So every layer gets fused with either a torch or a hot gun. So it creates, it just stays on the painting.
That's awesome. So the torch then that you're already using for creating paintings became a drawing tool.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I found a pencil torch, which was a lot of fun too.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks, Amy.
Mhm.
Another one from Harlan Mathieu. They do read to some extent like film. So I'm curious if you think of them as having a continuous narrative. That's nice.
Yes, I like that observation because a lot of them did feel like film to me as well, especially the ones with little squares within the square. Felt like one of those, those old fashioned slides.
Yeah, and then he also says, and of course, how strands relate to each other. Thank you. So yeah, it's like one film relating to the next film.
Yeah, just how they, I used materials, in more than one strand, so that all the strands have a kind of a repeated motif. So when you're in the installation, you'll see a circle over there that relates to the circle over here. So there's a lot of dialogue going on, which I like. So every square is individual, and yet they all relate to each other. Because my vocabulary, my abstract vocabulary is, I do a lot of stripes and circles and squares and grids, so I was playing with those ideas, but I also wanted to create other compositional elements, and that became a lot of fun as well. Sometimes I would do punch holes in the paper to create the light coming through. So I was really trying to draw with fire and light and shadow and shapes and color. Yeah.
Thank you. Joanne Acey asks, when did you decide how you would install it?
When did I decide how to install? Well, I had an idea of how I wanted it to be in the gallery, but I wasn't sure how to make it work. So I went in August and kind of mapped it out, and figured out I could create a passageway to the project space so we could see your beautiful work, and still have like a forest-like feeling throughout the space.
Guess what I meant, Amy? I wasn't very clear. I'm sorry. First of all, it's just so exciting to see so many of these pieces together. I guess my question really was like, when you were doing the series, like 700, did you say, oh, I want to show 600 in one place? Or did that just evolve as the work evolved?
Yeah, it was very kind of organic. As I was working more and more, I decided, well, it really was a lot of thoughts around death and dying. So I was like, well, let's do a kind of a tribute to people who have died of COVID. So that it became 600, and then I just kept going. And then when I took it and installed it in the space, I was like, well, I really do need a few more strands. And then it became 700.
Yeah. Dynamic.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's go back to the gallery view,
Okay.
Susan. And Wendy Gelsenleder, sorry if I'm
Yes, it's
butchering
okay,
names,
it's okay.
would like to
It's
make a comment.
Gelson Lighter. Yeah,
Okay.
actually, I'm one of the people that bought a strand.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I mean,
Thank you
I-
so much.
yeah, no, I live in the neighborhood, and I walked by one day and immediately, it said "gone fishing," and it was before the you could go in, and it immediately was struck. And I just love the work. But when last night I told a friend that I had made the decision to buy a strand, and she said to me, well, how are you going to feel? You're only going to have one strand. I mean, you need more than one. Which I thought was an interesting point, and it speaks to some of the questions that everyone has just been talking about. In the meantime, someone had bought one of the strands that I wanted the day before. So the other Amy emailed me and she said, just letting you know that one of the ones you wanted was just bought. So what I ended up doing was, based on what my friend said, and based on one of the ones that had just been bought, is that I ended up buying one that was very, very, very long. And so what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to cut it.
That's a great idea.
And so that I'm going to have two, because my ceilings in this apartment aren't big enough, aren't tall
Right.
enough. So that I will have a multiple, because as you said, and mine has an image that is replicated, is somewhere else in the gallery.
Uh-huh.
And so I know that it's connected to a piece that's in the gallery now, but I want that feeling of two, two
Yeah.
hanging instead of just one. But I just want to say your work, it's incredible.
Oh, thank you so much. Really,
yeah,
thank you.
Really beautiful. And
I think it's a really smart idea to do that.
right. I mean, it costs a little more money, but but I just it's just fast. I love it. And I also felt like looking at the other side, to me, I also run a material center where we use materials that would have been recycled or thrown away. And I use scrap paper a lot. And it almost looked like the other side was a piece of scrap paper that you, instead of throwing it away, it was a piece of paper that had something on it, and you decide to use that instead of,
Yeah.
it's so fascinating. And it was very, very difficult to decide which one.
Well, you picked a good one. Amy showed me, and
Oh, she did. Yeah.
It's one of my faves. So good job.
Yeah. Beautiful. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. And
Yeah.
Juliet Martin wanted to make a comment.
Hi, I'm actually a new member.
Hi, Juliet.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hi.
So it's really so exciting for the first show for me to be this show. It makes me so happy.
Hey.
I wanted to ask you, clearly materials are so much a part of what you're doing. And for example, the wax thread, clearly you meant the stitches to show, and you wanted the knots to show. And could you talk a little bit about that when you're sort of using a certain material almost to speak for itself?
Yeah. I really, like I said, I really love the idea of paper being so fragile and wanting that to be part of the piece, and then having the thread be very strong. So it was a nice balance between the two. And I really loved the knots and the hanging pieces. I thought that became part of the drawing as well. At first I was like, oh, is this gonna look messy? And but then I was like, no, this is really kind of fun and a little bit playful, and just added to the quality of fragility in a way.
It also
that I
feels very
really liked.
immediate. It feels very like it's happening as as you're seeing it.
Yeah, yeah,
Very
that's
immediate, yeah.
That's an interesting point, because a lot of my thoughts while I was working was wanting to keep it very immediate, but at the same time slow time down. It's like
Yeah.
the idea of the process itself is slowed down. Oh, I'm getting an echo. Sorry. Yeah. So I like.
I wanted to say, when I'm in between projects, we call it weaving purgatory.
Yes.
Well, I'm excited to see your work.
Yeah, I love how you said that the materials speak for themselves, because I feel that the materials have associations that even unfold over time as you revisit it. That at first the thread seems delicate, and then, like you said, it seems very strong, and then it reminds me of sutures, and then it reminds me of almost like a ladder rung, whatever the sides of the ladder are. And and then it's clearly just itself. It's not like a rendered thing.
Right.
It's trying to call a specific association.
Yeah, and recently I bought a book. One of my favorite artists, James Castle. I don't know if you guys know him, but he works with very humble materials. He was a self-taught artist, and he sewed cardboard, and I just love his work so much. So I was like kind of inspired by that humble, process that he used.
Who else has questions or comments or something to say?
I have something to say.
Okay.
I love how in the project space, it's about light and shadow as well. I think the whole gallery really has a nice integrated feel, both our shows, and it just feels really, really great to go into your space and see just the luminosity of your works.
Actually, I have a question for Janet. Could you maybe say something about the difference between, I've never worked with flash, I know acrylic. What's the difference between flash and acrylic?
Flash is a vinyl paint, so it's plastic. It's what animators used to work out on film, painting on film. Also gouache, they used to use gouache, which didn't really last. So I think that vinyl has it lasts. It's a durable medium. I myself have just started working with it over the winter, just because I've been seeing a lot of people work with it, and I switched out of oil for health reasons, and I wanted to be able to work with a medium that dried the same tone as what I painted, which you can't do with acrylic. That dries darker. So I don't know. I wanted to explore it, and I am enjoying. Let's talk. Because you might be interested in just this new medium that the color, it's produced in, this particular kind is produced in France, and it's not cheap, but their color selections are really exciting. And yeah.
Cool.
And you work it with water, by the way.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to say that my personal measurement, like when I see a show and it stays with me for a while and I keep thinking about it, and then I go back and see it again, and it hits me a very different way the next time I see it. I feel like, Amy, your show is very much like that for me, and also the show in the project space. Like, I could go back many times and it will read me differently each time. And I just want to thank you for 2 really spectacular shows.
Thank you.
So,
I have a question for Janet. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah. Are you like painting out of the jars, so to speak? I mean, it's like, are they like paint pots and you dip into them that way?
They are paint pots, but then I'm using a tray to mix paint with. So I'm also using some gesso in there as well, and mixing some of the paint in with the gesso. So to work directly from, I mean, I've worked directly from the paint pots as well. If I want just that very strong sort of unwatered, untampered or unwatered down color.
So it's also very opaque.
It's opaque, and with gesso that makes it even more so opaque. It also makes it a lot lighter and more of a pastel effect.
Right. Thank you.
Janet, can you add a medium to that flash? You know, I bought the flash, but I don't know.
Oh, did
really.
you? Yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't sure, like, if you could mix a medium with it, like an acrylic medium.
I haven't yet. The thing is that when you lay it down on your surface, you can also etch back into it with a pencil. You know, you can work different mediums on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you could work crayon or pencil or whatever, but water is all I've used as far as a direct medium. And, you know, you could also do acrylic gouache or gouache on top of it or in tandem with it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's fun. It's really fun to play around with, actually. But it dries really fast.
Janet, what surfaces are you using? You know, what are you using the paint on?
I'm using it, Diane, just on paper and because it seems to me that you can use larger brushes with this and get kind of loose and crazy with it, and paper responds to it really well. You could work on canvas also.
Okay.
Do you need to prime the paper?
And I don't, just work directly on watercolor paper. I haven't worked it with canvas yet, but I think you could. You definitely could.
I used it on wood panels. Very unorthodox painter I am.
And it's opaque, right? Have you tried it?
Yeah.
It's opaque.
Yeah, it looks pretty much like my my acrylic paintings.
Yeah.
I'm still, you know, I liked it and I'll continue to use it, but I felt that it looked very similar to my other paintings. I'm going to try it on paper.
Because it's so expensive, I found that working with gesso with it to tone your gesso, if you want lighter areas and work larger
that's
areas.
good advice.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Try that.
It's great to have a bold innovator here to ask questions of.
Flash.
You just start your flash clash.
Flash.
Send your
I wanted-
flash questions to Janet.
I wanted to compliment Robin. I used to be a ceramicist. I was horrible. But I really love the flatness of your unglazed shapes. I mean that in like the highest compliment. You know, when you say like flat, it sounds like a bad thing, but there's something really rich about these unglazed forms and the way you put them together.
Yeah, well, they were, like I said, they were just much easier to really see the form and to create the form in a two-dimensional surface by the fact that they were just completely matte and flat, as you say, flat, like a flat white. So it was, you know, a way for me to ease myself into painting more complex things or surfaces.
I have a question for Robin. Now that you've painted in oil and experimented and created 4 beautiful paintings. Will you continue with oil?
I don't know, because it seems, I mean, it seemed great for doing the still lifes, but my usual imagery is not really still lifes. And so I don't really, I just haven't wrapped my mind around how to use it to work in, you know, some of the drawings that I want to produce. So I don't know. The truth is, I don't know. Maybe not. It's
Well,
really,
I have a comment for Joy. It's not really a question, but I'm so amazed by your ability to create these incredibly lush, you know, paintings that still end up feeling loose, and they're mesmerizing. So I just love them.
Thank you, Amy. I actually work hard on that. You know, I actually sometimes go in with a goal and then I throw the goal out as I'm working on it. But often the watercolor determines that kind of looseness. So I spend a lot of time with the light values of a subject. And I bring that in at the very beginning, and I work hard to maintain that. So I'm always comparing how one value of a color sits next to another value. And I think that adds to the realism that I'm trying to attain, but also gives a sense of depth and light and space, which I think is all important to the work that I bring. Even among a flower, you know, a daisy has a shape to it with shadows and folds that go into darkness. So I'm constantly evaluating that with everything I paint.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Joy, I'm always amazed at the size of the work, what the kind of detail you do. And I think Amy's really right on target with the freshness of it and the openness. And what at first glance might look like a tight piece, you realize the more you look at it, how loose it becomes and very fluid. And as I say every time we talk about your work, your use of green, and that it's not any of it out of a tube, that you've mixed all those greens.
Yeah.
It's just way beyond anything I can even imagine. So kudos to you.
Thank you, Joanne. Some Daniel Smith greens have been slipping into my palette lately. Daniel Smith has been bringing in some interesting paints, but I do always kind of mix and keep it within the same family. But the other part too, watercolor, and my watercolors, is that everything has an edge to it. And I think this is also part of the realism, is painting ambiguity sometimes, you know, a soft edge that blends into something else. It's all over the place. So part of what I try and bring in is hard edges against the edges that disappear or become fuzzy or fade out into something else. And I think that helps bring in a depth and a drama to the piece also. Light and shadow plays into that.
Yeah.
Also,
I think
it's very important.
Yeah, I think drama is a good word to describe some of the ways that you use the color and the light in your work. I mean, even in your street, I'm going to call them street scenes, you know, where there's a dark sky or an evening sky, and then there's lights, you know, either from a house or from a car. I mean, there's just a magic about it, and it's a controlled magic, but it has this real life, you know, living feeling to it.
I start with that, and that actually that's from the photographs that I take. I mean, I see that in the scene, I see that in the viewfinder, and then it translates back into what I'm doing on the computer just to get an image. And
it's almost it's just incredible that when you're out there looking and seeing, that you don't lose that translation when you get to the painting. It still stays very much here.
I sometimes enhance it.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of times I do enhance it push that, everything is 10% a little bit more in either direction, a little bit more contrasty, or a little bit more shadow, or a little bit more dramatic. And, sometimes it's, the shadows, just make them purple, make them a color, make them rich. And, Janet, you're doing that in your shadows. And it's just, and I looked at it and it's like, yeah, that works. That's good. Let's move on, but I think that is part of the decision-making that I'm constantly making with these paintings. And working large is the blessing with that, I think. And one of the things I did when I got out of the hospital this summer and I was able to, sit at my desk a few days later, is I took out a full sheet of Arches paper, which is 22 by 30 inches. And that's double the size of what I'm showing here. And just, I put it on an easel and I stood up and just like got the brushes out in the water, and just, it was great. And so the size is a factor too. I don't think I could do these on tiny sheets of paper. They wouldn't be the same. I wouldn't attempt to. I'm really not into doing little tiny brushes and stuff. It's really about the freedom of movement in big areas and big strokes. Yeah.
I have a question about what you're saying about the tones. You mentioned it a couple times, and I don't know if you can tell me. I mean, there are sort of traditional things, like you look at people like John Kind, or some of the watercolor artists from the 19th century. They had a very specific order, say from light to dark, or from dark to light, or proceeding with the halftone and going both ways. Is there something that you gravitate towards in that respect?
I probably will always paint the sky first, because I think if you don't get the sky the right tone, and it's not necessarily the shade of blue, it's how light it is. If I don't get that right, the rest of the painting will not fall in place with that, because I'm constantly comparing how dark something should be against the sky, or how light something should be against the sky. And the other thing I do from the very beginning is I figure out where the white of the paper is going to be. And I often protect that with masking fluid. But all my paintings do have white paper in it. And so that again sort of sets a highlight, and then I can work in the dark areas. So I'm constantly kind of comparing those two and getting them to be in sync to that. And I think that gives it a certain realism. It gives it a depth. It gives it a drama with that. So, and I think that is a traditional watercolor technique. It's usually from light to dark. Sometimes I'm really eager to paint the dark areas though, and I may go in and work with them first, or I may put down an initial layer. My paintings are very layered. It's rare that I paint one color and leave it. They're generally layered in different colors to achieve a depth with it, especially in the dark areas. They could get a lot of layers on it.
That's surprising to me. Because you look at it and it just seems like, boom, it's just like right there.
No, not at all. And I think if you go look at the Magnolia painting in the background, there's the sky, and there's a massive tree going on back there. And I decided, it was a color wheel kind of thing, a blue sky against a kind of burnt rust color tree branches. So on the color wheel, they vibrate. And I did that intentionally just to kind of give a little drama, and also to set the tone going, that the tree was there, but the sky was predominantly important with that. And then with some white highlights on that, it gave it enough of the realism that I was looking for and the depth of that. And I was also fighting the fact that I wanted to keep those magnolias white. They were the bright of the painting. So it was kind of the interesting challenge that I threw out to myself. But I probably painted that sky first, just to kind of set the tone for the whole thing going on there.
It's very interesting. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a general comment again, going back to what Susan said. because I was gallery sitting on Thursday, and it's a very special. I love all the shows. It's always wonderful to gallery sit and to really be with the work for a period of time. But in this case, it was just like being in that forest, and it felt continued in the project space in just a very beautiful way. So congratulations to everybody. Gorgeous show. Janet, a flash, we need a flash class. We'll talk about that.
Flash dance.
Flash, well, we can flash dancing, but flash painting. Let's talk about that. Okay.
Let's do. Okay.
It would be great just to have, somebody.
I'm happy to share any.
Yeah, because I mean, it's, it's like everything. It's like Encaustic. I mean, you don't plunge into these things without some guidance because, it's a very expensive plunge.
Oh, yeah. That it is.
Yes, yes. So, okay, we'll talk about that. I'm going to mute myself again.
Lynn Cole says she would love an Encaustic class. So, Amy, you could think about that. I just want to say thank you all for today.
Amy's having some technical difficulty, so I'm going to hand my screen over to her.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
She did not hear that comment.
Okay.
I don't know who said that. They would
Amy,
love an Encaustic class.
Oh,
Lynn Cole
definitely.
says she would love an Encaustic class. So think about that. And so I wanted to say thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you for a really fascinating discussion. And before we go, I want to make sure that I mention the next show coming up is Susan Greenstein, Brooklyn Local. It's from October 13th to November. Oh, I didn't get the end date.
Oh, then
20th?
November 21st.
21st. So make a note of that.
You have an
Also-
echo, Karen. You have
I'm
an
sorry?
echo. We all have an echo.
I don't know why that's happening.
No, it's because Amy was on and somehow that created and I muted you, Amy. I'm sorry.
Oh, is it okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. And in the project space, along with Susan in the solo gallery, we have Close to Nature, another nature themed show with Joanne Acey, Gail Flannery, and myself. So stay tuned for that. I also would like you to know about the Small Work Show. The curator is George Del Barrio. That is going to be from December 1st to January 7th. And if you'd like to submit work for that, the deadline is October 9th. So you can go to the gallery, to our gallery's website, and there's info about that there. And Amy, I know, has an upcoming show. Can you unmute and tell us, Amy, the show that's coming up? Amy Weil, you're muted, but
can you hear me?
yeah.
Yes.
So I have a show in a very, very, very small little bookstore in Chelsea. And it's going to be at the end of early October. And I'm not sure the dates yet. So I will get it out there with an email. But it's a vintage art, bookstore. So it'll be like 5 paintings in there.
Great, thank you. Stay tuned. And Juliet, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I have a show coming up in early October as well at a weaving studio in Dumbo.
Cool.
So yeah, stay tuned to our social media. We'll post it on our social media. And one more show, Joy.
I just posted it on the chat.
Okay, so Joy, do you want to just tell us the details?
It's the
And-
Pennsylvania Watercolor Society annual exhibition. It's an online show this year. I have a
So if
piece
you'd
there.
like, if you're interested in that, go to the chat and grab the link.
It'll
And
open
then-
next week, yeah.
Last but not least, there's Open Studio, the Gowanus Annual Open Studio Tour, sponsored by Arts Gowanus. It's happening this year in many of our member artist studios, mine included, October 16th and 17th. So go to Arts Gowanus website for more information about that. And I think that is all my announcements.